This idea that we've been in the last couple of weeks is we've been talking about wholeness, which is a spiritual principle many of us understand as when we understand our totality as divine beings. We know ourselves to be whole. But wholeness is synonymous with integrity. And so we've been talking about being in integrity is being in wholeness. And we've looked at a couple of ways that we can be in integrity, that we can be in wholeness, which is being in the flow of energy, right? Getting really clear about what's interrupting or disrupting our flow. We've talked about being in congruence, which is living our lives from the inside out. From the truth of who we are is how we are moving in the world. And the last aspect of this wholeness is about being on purpose. When you gather up that flow of energy, when you understand the truth of who you are and you ground yourself in that centered place, you allow all of that truth, all of that passion and peace and joy and unique authenticity that you are, that is now what you get intentional about. You get really intentional about being that. You get really intentional about putting yourself out into the world on purpose. And all of those pieces of integrity and wholeness is true for us individually, and it's true for us collectively. As a community, we get to be on purpose. As a group of humans who happen to come together around a philosophy, around a faith tradition, around shared values based in love, which is what happened yesterday. We get to be really on purpose, collectively. And this is a demonstration of our wholeness, a demonstration of our divine nature. And one of the ways that unexpectedly unfolded for me this past weekend is I had an opportunity to sit down with a couple of community members, and they gifted me with a really beautiful journal. And one of the things I believe that happens in community is we become reflections for one another, right? We see ourselves in one another. And in the journal, they wrote me a little note, and it was beautiful. But they quoted me back to me. You know how that happens sometimes? They tell you something you said back to you. And they reminded me of a blessing and a prayer I wrote back in 2018. May I walk eyes wide open in love, centered in peace, stepping with grace. And I thought, ooh, I needed to be reminded of that. Thank you, Martha and Cliff, for the journal and for the reminder. May I walk eyes wide open, in love, centered in peace, stepping with grace. That is one of the ways I had chosen in my life to be really on purpose. On purpose with how I chose to show up in the world. Knowing that love and that peace and that grace was within me. And that I could take that with me out into the world. From our book, 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. We are whole or in integrity, not just when energy is flowing or when we are congruent, but also when we are on purpose. Integrity is knowing what we are up to in the world and being in complete devotion to it. I love the word devotion. I get to think about what is it that I'm actually devoting myself to. Because when I'm really clear about my wholeness, when I'm really clear about my inner life and my inner truth, and allow myself to be that out in the world, I get to devote myself to that. And then I decided I needed to look up the definition of devotion, which is love, loyalty, or enthusiasm. And do you know the Greek root for enthusiasm is entheos, which means to be filled with God. This is the truth of who you are. This is the truth of who you are. You are filled with God. And what happens when we enthusiastically allow ourselves to move in the world knowing this truth, being this truth, and devoting ourselves to that? This is about being on purpose with our wholeness. Purpose is a verb, means to propose and aim to oneself. So when I propose and aim at the truth of myself, and I devote myself to that aim, I am on purpose. You are on purpose. When you decide, I am a life of the one. I've been put on this planet on purpose. I am here by divine appointment. There has been no accident. God does not make mistakes. And when I aim for my true self and decide to devote myself to that, what begins to happen in our communities, in our relationships? So I let a couple people know, Grace and Emmanuel, that I was going to be asking people to come up and share on the microphone, because what I know about Beloved Community is it has very little to do with me, and it has everything to do with y'all. So one of the people I picked on was Jan Nolan, who is a practitioner in our community, who I wanted to have her come up and share with us what happens when we lose our aim, when we forget the truth of who we are and the absolute profound power to be reminders for one another, much like Cliff and Martha were for me. Come on up.
Thank you. Reverend Amani reminded me earlier that I have community for support. I have not been well this past month, and as a practitioner, I've been trained to ask for prayer, to give prayer, to receive prayer, and I haven't done that. I've retreated, I've separated. I don't like being vulnerable. I've lost my way. Not being well, it's very hard. I'm used to showing up a certain way. I want to look a certain way, be present. I'm not that present to myself, let alone all of you. But I look at these faces, and I know you're my community. I've been part of this community for many, many years. And it's interesting, I know I'm not the only one. You know, separation, it takes a hold. It takes a grip. And I have lost my purpose. I've questioned everything. Who am I? What am I doing here? Am I part of this community? I know the truth. But I'm here to share this just so you all can feel that comradeship, that you're not alone, we're not alone. We all go through phases where we're vulnerable and weakened. And all it takes is just a little glimmer of showing up and maybe recognizing in someone else that they're there and that we're here. So just know that we all are one, and we share similar pain, discomfort, vulnerabilities, but we're all united in love.
Thank you, Jan. It takes courage. It takes courage to come up here and stand in front of y'all and say, I'm one of you, and this is what I'm going through, and I need you. One of the words that came up over and over again yesterday as we visioned and prayed together was courage. The courage to be uncomfortable, the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to say hard things. Thank you, grace. This is part of that enthusiasm, that entheos, that when we connect ourselves to our inward sanctuary, to that inner knowing, to that peace and that intellect and that calm that lives within each one of us, when we connect to that, we are also powered by it, giving us the courage and the bravery to show up in community and in our relationships authentically and honestly. And one of the things that became clear to me yesterday as my prayers were being answered was maybe I hadn't prayed out loud quite enough. And I realized if it isn't obvious, the point of us being in community is to be a community of practice. The point of us gathering together virtually online is to be a community of practice, so that we can take these principles and these ideas and our faith, and whatever that faith is, and walk it together. I'm going to ask Paul Cox to come up for a moment, because Paul came in today and I haven't seen him in a really long time, so I want y'all online to be able to see him if you haven't seen him in a long time. But Paul had this shirt on that I had no idea what it meant. BB the BB. You want to tell us what that means?
It means to walk the walk. And I actually got to experience that pretty strongly this week. I'm probably going to cry. I recently had COVID, and coming back out of it, I had a real bad depression stage. And I knew I needed help. Didn't know who to reach out to. And I had a missed call on my phone. And I look at it and it's like, it says, Jeff McNutt. And so I called him back. It turns out it was a butt dial. He asked how I was doing, and I broke down. I was like, I'm not doing okay. And so I went to his house the next day, and we spent 2 hours just talking, and he helped me break everything down and just really helped me pull out the other side. And the next couple days, all I thought is I've needed a male role model in my life. Jeff has always been that. I've needed a father figure in my life, and you've been that 100%. And I'm so grateful.
BB the BB, y'all. BB the BB, walk the walk. That's why we're in community. As this gives us the opportunity to lovingly and compassionately hold one another accountable to the truth of who we are. And even when we forget the truth of who we are, we get to lovingly come together and say, but I do know the truth of who you are. And let me help you remember. Walk with me when I forget. Which reminds me of, again, the prayer that Cliff and Martha brought back to me. May I walk in love, centered in peace, stepping with grace. And when I forget, you all remind me. When I get lost, I just have to show up and experience the answered prayer. Because your grace becomes my grace again. And my love becomes your love again. And we continue to aim. We continue to be on purpose. And I think sometimes in spiritual community and church and spiritual centers, whatever language works for you, things become disconnected. We think, I just need to show up on Sunday, and then I get like my spiritual food. And real talk, sometimes it feels like we just need to come in here and be fed, kind of like babies in a high chair. We just need to get a little spoon feeding because we forget.
But then we think we're done. We're like, okay, I did my church thing, did my thing, bye. And we forget that the whole reason we come together isn't just to be fed. It is to be in the practice of our teaching together, to be messy together, to forget and be reminded, to be reflections, to be curious about that person over there who's getting on my nerves and yet they're the face of God. Okay. That's why we come. That's why we show up online. And it is our honor to do so. It is our privilege to do so. It is the reminder that we are not alone. You are not alone in this. You don't have to walk in the door or hop online and not speak to anybody. Not let us know you're here in the comment feed. This is one of the small ways you get to be reminded that you are not alone. That you exist in a community of connection. That you exist in a community of folks who are trying to just stay on aim too. And that comfort and that care doesn't even have to look how you think it might need to look. It could just happen in the simple ways of showing up or in a butt dial, right? And seeing a comment on the chat feed, that was exactly what you needed to hear today. To see and hear the prayer request that is yours too, and maybe you didn't have the courage yet today to say it out loud, to type it for others to see. This has always been our purpose. Otherwise, we would all be at home on our little cushions meditating by ourselves. But I want to make sure today that I say it out loud. This has never been about me or any other minister, ever. We just happen to talk and like to talk a lot. That's really the only difference. This has always been about the community. This has always been about the humans who have decided to show up and be together. Because I can talk to myself. I do it a lot. And I believe this being on purpose as an aspect of our wholeness needs to be acknowledged, and we get to get really intentional and we get to devote ourselves to it. The aim for our true selves and the aim for community that is gathered around the idea that we are love in action. One of the most beautiful things that came up yesterday was there was such common ground on being love in action between both communities. There was such shared enthusiasm for being of service and wanting to come together and be the good in our local community. It had nothing to do with how we defined God or Allah. It had everything to do with, like, when we come together, we are a powerful force for good. Let's get intentional about that. Let's get on purpose about that. Let's devote ourselves to that. And I don't know about you, but if you know Maddie, who I lovingly refer to as Maddie Madikins, is the embodiment of enthusiasm. And I would love to have Maddie coming up and talk about her experience yesterday in our community of love in action. Maddie Madikins.
Oh, this is a surprise. I said a little bit when we were lighting candles. I grew up in the Jewish faith, and I felt separate a lot. As a kid, I grew up in a small town in California, and we were the only Jewish kids in my school, except for one girl named Beth Kaplan. I don't know where Beth went, but anyway, we were separate. Everybody else was Christian, and on Fridays, I think every other Friday, we were next to the YWCA, and they would have Christian classes, and all the kids in the whole school would go there, except for us three. And us three would sit back and have to do schoolwork while they did something that seemed like it must have been really fun, right? Because they came back pretty enthusiastic and joyful. And I was really resentful that I didn't get to go. I was separate. I was different. One time I asked if I could go, and I think they wanted me to be a Christian, so they said yes. So when I went, I asked a lot of questions because I didn't know about Jesus and angels and the way they talked about it and a lot of different things. And they didn't ask me back. I asked a lot of questions. They didn't ask me back. I wasn't part of that. And so I think part of yesterday, it makes me almost want to cry. I went to the Ramadan Saturdays for several weeks with the Islam community, and they didn't care that I was Jewish or that I was a person that went to ABQCSL. They didn't care what I thought about God, and when I asked them questions, they answered all of them with joy and openness because they wanted to share their beliefs with me, and they wanted me to share my beliefs with them. And it was a beautiful thing. And yesterday was like an even bigger experience of that. It was us sharing our thoughts and beliefs, and it was funny. And what was there, a Taylor Swift table? People named their tables. And there was a Taylor Swift table, and I don't know, our table wasn't that creative in naming our name, but it was just like, gosh, we are one. No matter what we think about God or anything in the universe, we are still one. We absolutely are made from the same thing, and we experience the same things. We just might have different thoughts about it. So, bye, Amani. I didn't know you were going to call me, and I had to cry and everything. What I know is if we, and we will, continue to have this coming together of our communities, and as each one of us see that and believe that and know that we're one, even with the person that we don't like what they're saying, and know that they are all the face of God, and all of us go out there and share that, and then you share that with someone else, and they share that, and we can change the world.
Amen, amen.
Let's do that.
Amen, amen. Right? Is she not the picture of Entheos? Thank you, Maddie. Oh, and I love what I'm seeing on the chat feeds. You guys are loving each other up and speaking your gratitudes for one another. This is what it's about. This is what it's about. And when I was thinking about this idea of being community on purpose, and I deeply believe that our time together yesterday with Manara is planted a seed of this, of being community on purpose. And I know without a doubt that something very beautiful is going to rise from the soil of what we planted yesterday. And I know that because I know love. And I know what happens when we get intentional, because I know from my own experience of being really, really devoted to what I know to be true, it is what shows up. Anybody else? In your affirmative prayer practices? And you're just like vibing, right? When something is like, oh yeah, this is it. And it has no choice in the law, in the spiritual law of resonance and cause and effect. It has no choice but to show up. And our job, right, is to get juicy with that, is to get devoted to that. And continue to aim back to truth, back to love, back to grace. And I was speaking with one of the Muslim community members yesterday, and we were talking about how sacred text, it doesn't matter what sacred text you read, the reason sacred text it becomes meaningful and becomes the 1 or 2 or 17 or 47 like me, the reason that we are drawn to sacred text is because it resonates with what we already know to be true. This is what we continue to aim for. This is what we devote ourselves to, is being that resonation of love, being that radio frequency, that radio station, that beacon of light that radiates love. And it has no matter what book you happen to read that inspires you to love. No matter. None at all. Doesn't matter what words you pray with, whether you pray or not. But when we devote ourselves to being the love and allowing that love to move us in right action, and when we do that collectively, holy cow, entheos, enthusiasm, being on purpose. I was thinking about, he doesn't know I'm going to call him up, but Vincent, I'm calling you up. So come make your way. Make your way. Vincent is one of our newer members, and I learned a story from Vincent. He came to learn how to use our AV equipment recently, and he was sharing how he came to know that we existed. And I found out that the first video Vincent found of us was, shall I say, risque? Do you want to tell that story, how you found us? What resonated for you?
Yes, I will tell the story because
Here,
you asked me to.
let me help you out.
So I used to live down the street, and now I live in the North Valley. And I always wanted to come because I would drive by here when I would come to go to Smith's, and I was thinking, oh, that sounds like a really cool place to go. But I never went. And then during the pandemic, I started watching the videos, and the first video on YouTube I saw was Clarissa in the bathtub. And what encouraged me to come was, it may not be what you think. I thought, these people are nuts. I want to see how crazy they are. And, like, at least it'll give me something fun to do during the pandemic, to hang out with a bunch of crazy people. So, and so, I'm here, and not only are you crazy, you're still all maniacs on a mission, but also, I found a group of like-minded people that Spirit was attracting me to, that I didn't even know it. I thought I was here for fun, and Spirit had a whole nother plan for me. So thank you all for welcoming me, and thank you, Amani, for
I'm glad you guys laughed as hard as I did when he shared that with me. Oh, but that is part of how we find our way to one another. And discover that we are resonant and it may be like resonant in like, I just want to come and have fun with y'all. That's reason enough. That's reason enough. But, as Vincent said, you may discover along the way, whatever brought you to the video, whatever brought you to the room, there is an opportunity for you to discover your greatest purpose in life. Your greatest aim in life, which is that you are divine. That the very power and wonder and love of the Holy Blessed One is living itself through you. And you get to be in community with folks who are discovering that as well, and are devoting themselves to being on purpose about that as well. And that by itself changes the world. That by itself is enough. So a question I want to ask all of you is, what's your purpose? What are you devoted to? I'm going to give you a minute to answer. It's not hypothetical. One of the ways we know what we've devoted ourselves to is how we spend our time, how we spend our thoughts. And having an honest conversation with ourselves about how we're spending our time and our thoughts. And then discerning, am I in alignment with what I say I want to be about? Have I lost my aim? Do you know that the Hebrew translation of sin means to miss the mark? To be off aim? That's it. And if we are not in a regular conversations with ourselves about whether or not we're on target, whether or not we have aligned our aliveness with the truth, whether or not we are devoting ourselves to what really matters, if there's anything that we've been invited to during this pandemic season, this season of what appears to be apocalypse, if there is anything that has risen and as an invitation is what matters. I think many of us have had to get beautifully, uncomfortably, really clear about what's important, who we want to spend time with. I mean, people are quitting their jobs, like epidemic quitting their jobs, because they're like, yeah, it's not it. I can't give any more time to that. I'm worth more. My life is more valuable than that. Whole bunch of relationships ended. Yeah, it's not on target. But it's not about just the endings. It's about we end and make way for what matters, for what we actually want to devote ourselves to. And I believe that is true for community as well and organizations as well. Things have to fall away so that what matters has room. And anything that is out of alignment with that must crumble. We're seeing it everywhere, in our own lives and all around the globe. But the story doesn't end with the crumble. That's a beginning. You know that the definition of apocalypse, the translation of that word just simply means to lift the veil. To see more clearly. Anybody feel like they would like to see more clearly? Right? Could anybody begin to get enthusiastic about seeing more clearly? About being able to call your time and your talent and your treasures back to what matters? That everything unfolding and crumbling and falling apart in your life right now is a blessing? Really? Is an invitation, is a divine invitation to what matters. Life is like, let me get that out of the way for you. Here. It is always moving for good, this thing that I call God. It is always on purpose. And we are always being invited to align ourselves and get on purpose with Spirit. Individually and collectively.